The bruises on Jerome's arms weren't from construction work. Terrell Big T Johnson had seen plenty of damage in his Mafia days, but this was different. Jerome Jackson had been his most trusted crane operator for 15 years, practically family since they came up together in Detroit's streets. Now Jerome stood in his office, dark purple marks covering his forearms like a roadmap of pain. "Boss, I need to tell you something," Jerome said quietly, eyes avoiding Terrell's gaze. "Equipment malfunctioned yesterday. Danny said not to worry you with the paperwork." Terrell's old instincts kicked in. In his street days, unexplained bruises meant someone was sending a message, but Jerome's hands were shaking. Not from fear of Terrell, but something else entirely. Jerome had never been afraid of him, not even when Terrell ran these streets with bullets instead of blueprints. What Jerome told him next would shatter everything Terrell thought he knew. 20 years ago, Terrell Johnson would have handled this differently. Back then, when someone hurt his people, the solution came fast and permanent. But those days were buried beneath 2 decades of legitimate business, community respect, and a construction empire built on sweat instead of blood. Johnson Construction sprawled across 3 city blocks in downtown Detroit, a testament to what a man could build when he traded bullets for blueprints. The morning sun cast long shadows across the main site, where steel beams rose like geometric trees against the skyline. Diesel engines rumbled their familiar symphony, mixing with the rhythmic clang of hammers on metal. Terrell walked the perimeter with the measured pace of a man who understood territory. Every worker nodded respectfully as he passed. Not the fearful deference of his street days, but genuine respect earned through fair wages and safer working conditions than most sites in the city. "Mornin', Mr. Johnson," called Marcus Williams, his most trusted foreman and one of the few who remembered when Terrell's reputation came from different skills. Marcus had made the same transition, trading corner dealing for crane operating, and now supervised the morning crew with the same attention to detail that once kept them alive on dangerous streets. "Marcus, is everything running smoothly?" "Like clockwork, boss, though—" Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the construction trailer where Danny Ricci held his daily safety briefings. "Danny's been making some changes to the shift assignments. Didn't run them by you first." The first warning bell rang in Terrell's mind. In his legitimate business, he insisted on approving major scheduling changes personally. Not from control, from care. These weren't just employees. They were his community, men who'd followed him from the neighborhoods into honest work. "What kind of changes?" "Rotating some of the guys to different equipment, adjusting safety protocols, says it's for efficiency optimization." Marcus's tone carried the subtle skepticism of someone who'd learned to read between lines during harder times. Through the trailer windows, Terrell could see Danny addressing a group of workers. Tall, lean, and perpetually dressed like he'd stepped from a corporate handbook, Danny Ricci had arrived 2 years ago with impressive credentials and union connections. The perfect hire to legitimize Johnson Construction's bid for larger municipal contracts. But watching him now, something felt off. Danny's gestures were too animated, his smile too practiced. Terrell's old instincts, rusty but not dead, whispered warnings. "Boss, there's something else," Marcus said quietly. "The injury reports this month. They're all what? All our guys, none of Danny's preferred crew." Terrell stopped walking. In his street days, patterns meant everything. Random violence was rare, most attacks followed logic, targeting specific people for specific reasons. "Show me." They entered the main office where safety reports lined the walls in neat rows. Terrell's eyes scanned the documentation, his mind automatically cataloging details the way it once memorized territory boundaries and rival crew movements. Jerome Jackson. Concrete mixer malfunction, lacerated forearms. Damon Carter, scaffolding collapse, bruised ribs and back. Kevin Washington, crane cable snap, nearly crushed. Antoine Brown, electrical panel shock, burns on hands. All black workers, all experienced, reliable men who'd been with the company for years. All working under Danny's new efficiency protocols. "Damn," Terrell muttered, the word carrying 20 years of suppressed instincts. "Gets worse," Marcus continued, pulling another folder. "Check the timing. All these accidents happened when Danny was supervising their sections directly. The pattern crystallized like a crime scene coming into focus. Terrell had built his legitimate empire on two principles: protect his people and stay clean. Someone was testing both. Where's Danny now? Meeting with some insurance adjusters, third time this month. Insurance adjusters. After a month of unusual accidents, Terrell's jaw tightened as old paranoia merged with legitimate business concerns. In his street days, unusual patterns meant someone was making a move. In legitimate business, unusual insurance activity could destroy everything he'd built. Get Jerome in here. Now. As Marcus headed for the door, Terrell stared out at his construction site. His proof that men could change, that communities could transform, that violence wasn't the only path to respect and security, but someone was playing games with his people. And despite 20 years of going legitimate, Terrell Johnson still remembered exactly how those games were won. The question was whether he could win this one without losing everything he'd become. The scream cut through the morning air like a blade through steel. Terrell was reviewing safety protocols when the sound reached his office, raw, primal terror that triggered every protective instinct he'd developed in 45 years of hard living. He was moving before his mind fully processed what he'd heard, his legs carrying him toward the main construction area with the urgency of a man who'd learned that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. "Jerome! Somebody help!" The voice belonged to Marcus, but the panic in it was something Terrell hadn't heard since their street days. He rounded the corner of the equipment yard to find a scene that would have been familiar 20 years ago, except this time the blood wasn't from bullets. Jerome Jackson lay crumpled beside the concrete mixer, his right arm bent at an unnatural angle, crimson spreading across the gray concrete in an expanding pool. The massive machine's mixing drum hung askew, its safety cage twisted like a metal pretzel. What the hell happened? Terrell dropped to his knees beside Jerome, his hands automatically checking for pulse and breathing, skills that hadn't died with his criminal past. "Drum assembly broke loose," Marcus gasped, applying pressure to Jerome's worst wound. "Safety pin just snapped. Things came down like a hammer." Jerome's eyes found Terrell's, unfocused but conscious. "Boss, wasn't supposed to. Danny said the machine was—" "Don't talk, man. An ambulance is coming." But Terrell's attention had already shifted to the concrete mixer itself. 20 years of reading crime scenes had taught him to see details others missed. The safety pin hadn't just broken. The metal showed clear signs of stress fractures that should have been caught during routine inspection. "Where's Danny?" Terrell's voice carried the cold edge that used to precede violence. "Right here, T." Danny Ricci appeared at the edge of the crowd, his face a mask of professional concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Terrible accident. These older machines, you never know when metal fatigue is going to— Metal fatigue? Terrell stood slowly, his full height casting a shadow over Danny's smaller frame. "This machine was serviced last week. I signed the inspection report myself." "Well, obviously something was missed during—" "Nothing was missed." Terrell's voice dropped to the whisper-quiet tone that once made grown men reconsider their life choices. "Jerome's the best equipment operator in the city. He doesn't make mistakes." Danny's composure cracked slightly. "Look, T, I know you want to protect your guys, but sometimes these people just don't follow safety protocols the way they should. It's cultural, you know? They're more casual about rules." The words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Every worker within earshot stopped what they were doing. Marcus's hands stilled on Jerome's wounds. Even the ambient noise of the construction site seemed to quiet, as if the entire job site was holding its breath. Terrell felt something dark and familiar rising in his chest, the same cold fury that had once made him the most feared lieutenant on Detroit's South Side. But this was different. This wasn't about territory or respect or criminal hierarchy. This was about his family, his people, his community being systematically targeted by someone who thought he was too stupid to notice. "Cultural?" Terrell repeated the word like he was tasting poison. Danny, perhaps sensing he'd overstepped, tried to backtrack. "I just meant that some workers need more supervision than others. It's not personal, it's just—" "Jerome's been operating heavy equipment longer than you've been out of college," Terrell interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying the kind of authority that came from years of life-and-death decisions. "He's trained half the crane operators in this city, and you're telling me he casually ignored safety protocols?" The ambulance sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. Jerome was losing too much blood, his breathing getting shallow. Terrell looked down at his most loyal worker, a man who'd followed him from the streets into legitimate business, who'd trusted him to provide safe, honest work. "Danny," Terrell said without looking up from Jerome's pale face, "you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about these safety protocols. Real soon." For the first time since arriving at Johnson Construction, Danny Ricci looked genuinely afraid. Not the professional concern of a manager facing liability issues, but the primal fear of a man who'd just realized he might have miscalculated his opponent. As the ambulance screamed into the construction yard, Terrell made a promise to himself and to Jerome's unconscious form. Somebody was going to pay for this. The only question was whether justice would come through boardrooms or back alleys. After 20 years of being legitimate, Terrell Johnson was about to remember why people used to cross the street when they saw him coming. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Terrell sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at the blood under his fingernails. Jerome's blood, while doctors worked to save his friend's arm 3 doors down the hall. 20 years of legitimate business hadn't prepared him for this feeling. When someone crossed him in the old days, the response was swift and brutal, clean. But now he had lawyers and insurance companies and proper procedures to follow. The system was supposed to protect people like Jerome. Clearly, the system was failing. "Mr. Johnson?" Dr. Martinez emerged from the operating room, still in scrubs. "Your employee is stable. We managed to save the arm, but there's significant nerve damage. He'll need months of physical therapy, and he may never regain full strength." Terrell nodded, processing the information with the same methodical calm he'd once used to plan territorial expansions. "Can I see him?" "He's sedated, but yes, briefly." Jerome looked small against the white hospital sheets, his powerful frame diminished by tubes and monitors. His right arm was wrapped in enough bandages to look like a mummy, elevated and motionless. This was a man who could operate a 50-ton crane with the precision of a surgeon, reduced to hoping he'd ever hold his daughter again. "I'm sorry, brother," Terrell whispered. "This is on me." But sorry wouldn't fix Jerome's arm. Sorry I wouldn't protect the other workers. Sorry was a luxury Terrell couldn't afford, not when someone was hunting his people. Marcus was waiting in the hallway when Terrell emerged. "Boss, I pulled the maintenance records like you asked." He handed over a thick folder. "Something you need to see." They found a quiet corner near the vending machines. Terrell opened the folder, his eyes scanning dates and signatures with the same focus he'd once applied to surveillance reports. "Look at the inspection dates," Marcus pointed. "Every piece of equipment that had an accident was last serviced by Danny's outside contractor, not our regular maintenance team." "Hartwell Industrial Services," Terrell read from the invoice header. "Never heard of them." "Neither had I, so I made some calls. The company was formed 6 months ago. Guess who's listed as a reference on their business license application?" Terrell's jaw tightened. "Danny. Gets better. I checked with the state licensing board. Half the certifications listed on their work orders, expired or fraudulent. The pieces were falling into place like they used to during his detective days on the streets, except now he was hunting predators in hard hats instead of corner boys with guns. The methodology was the same. Follow the money, track the patterns, identify the weakness. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Something that stays between us." "What kind of something?" "The kind where you pretend you don't know me as well as you do." Terrell's voice carried the quiet intensity that used to precede major operations. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be doing some quality control inspections, random spot checks on equipment and safety procedures. Boss, Danny handles what I let him handle. But I built this company, and I know every bolt and beam in it. I reminded myself what that looks like from the ground up." Marcus studied Terrell's face, reading the determination there. "You're going undercover, in your own company. I'm going to work alongside the crews, see what really happens when management isn't watching. Learn how Danny operates when he thinks the boss is busy in meetings. And if you find what I think you're going to find..." Terrell was quiet for a long moment, staring through the hospital window at the Detroit skyline he'd helped rebuild. "Then Danny's going to learn that there's a difference between a reformed criminal and a reformed fool." He stood up, straightening his jacket. Get me work clothes and a hard hat. Tomorrow, Terrell Johnson is just another quality inspector making sure his people get home safe. What about your meetings? The municipal contract review? Cancel them. Terrell's smile was cold as winter steel. I've got more important work to do. Day one of Terrell's investigation started at 5:47 a.m. when he clocked in with the early crew wearing borrowed work clothes and a hard hat that covered most of his distinctive features. To the newer workers, he was just another quality inspector. To the veterans who recognized him, a subtle nod conveyed the message, keep your mouth shut and your eyes open. Marcus had done his homework. Terrell's cover story was simple. Corporate required random quality audits following the recent accidents. Danny wouldn't question it because questioning safety protocols after multiple incidents would look suspicious to insurance investigators. Morning, Inspector, called Kevin Washington, loading rebar onto a truck. Kevin had been one of Danny's accident victims, electrical burns that kept him out of work for 2 weeks. Are you here about these safety violations? Just routine checks, Terrell replied, pulling out a clipboard. The same type of clipboard where he'd first noticed Jerome's blood. Walk me through your equipment inspection process. What Kevin showed him made Terrell's blood run cold. The electrical panel that had shocked Kevin bore clear signs of amateur rewiring. Wires that should have been secured with proper junction boxes were twisted together with electrical tape. Ground connections had been deliberately loosened. To an untrained eye, it looked like normal wear and tear. To someone who'd once run criminal enterprises, it looked like sabotage designed to create plausible deniability. Kevin, who worked on this panel last? Danny's contractor guys, Hartwell Industrial, said they were updating the circuits for efficiency. Have you ever seen these Hartwell guys before they started working here? Kevin glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. Mister, Inspector, I ain't supposed to say this, but these boys ain't electricians. Heard one of them asking another how to tell positive from negative wire. Terrell documented everything with photos, his old investigation instincts guiding him to capture evidence from multiple angles. Each image told part of a larger story, a systematic campaign to make Johnson Construction's safety record look incompetent. By noon, he'd moved to the crane operation area where Antoine Brown was working. Antoine had been Danny's most recent victim before Jerome, nearly crushed when a crane cable unexpectedly snapped under load. Tell me about your pre-shift inspection routine, Terrell said, studying the massive crane that towered over the job site. Same every day, Antoine replied, patting the machine's cab with obvious affection. Check fluid levels, test all controls, inspect cables for wear. Been doing it for 15 years, never had a cable snap on me before last week. Show me the cable that broke. Antoine led him to a storage area where damaged equipment waited for disposal. The severed cable lay coiled like a steel snake, its broken end revealing something that made Terrell's old criminal instincts scream warnings. The cable hadn't snapped from wear or overload. Multiple strands showed clean cuts, as if someone had carefully weakened the cable's internal structure while leaving the outer wrapping intact. Under stress, it would fail catastrophically. But to investigators, it would look like a maintenance issue. Antoine, Terrell said carefully, who has access to equipment storage? Maintenance crew, supervisors, and them Hartwell boys when they're doing their inspections. Hartwell was here the night before your accident? Yeah, Danny had them working late. Said something about preventive maintenance before the weekend. Terrell photographed the cable from every angle, his mind racing through implications. This wasn't just racism or incompetence. This was a coordinated attack designed to systematically destroy his company's reputation and financial stability. By 3 p.m., his suspicions had hardened into certainty. Every piece of equipment involved in accidents showed similar signs of deliberate sabotage disguised as maintenance issues. Whoever was behind this understood construction equipment well enough to create failures that would fool insurance investigators and safety inspectors. But they hadn't counted on being investigated by someone who'd spent 20 years learning to read criminal conspiracies. Marcus, Terrell called his foreman over during a break, I need you to do something without asking questions. What's that, boss? Tonight, after the site clears, I want you to take a drive. See who else might be working late. Don't approach anyone. Don't let them see you. Just observe and report. You think Danny's bringing people in after hours? I think Danny's been very busy when he thought nobody was watching. That evening, Terrell positioned himself in an abandoned building across from his construction site. Old surveillance habits died hard, and the elevated position gave him a clear view of the entire facility. At 9:15 p.m., just as Marcus had predicted, a white van pulled through the gates. 3 men emerged, led by Danny Ricci. Through binoculars, Terrell watched them methodically visit different pieces of equipment. They moved with purpose, spending several minutes at each station before moving to the next. At the concrete mixer where Jerome had been injured, Danny directed one man to adjust something in the safety mechanism, while another took photographs with a digital camera. They were documenting their work, standard procedure for professional saboteurs who needed to prove they'd completed assigned tasks. Terrell's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Boss, you seeing this?" He typed back, "Every detail. Stay hidden." What happened next confirmed Terrell's worst fears. The team moved to equipment assigned to Damon Carter, who was scheduled to operate the crane first thing Monday morning. They spent 20 minutes working on something in the machinery compartment, their movements careful and precise. These weren't random vandals or incompetent contractors. This was a professional operation designed to create a pattern of accidents that would destroy Johnson Construction's safety rating, drive up insurance costs, and ultimately force Terrell into bankruptcy. At 11:30 p.m., the van departed. Terrell remained in position for another hour, ensuring they wouldn't return before calling Marcus. "Meet me at the site in 10 minutes. Bring a camera and work lights." They spent the next 2 hours documenting everything the sabotage team had touched. Under proper lighting, the evidence was overwhelming. Hydraulic lines had been weakened with precise cuts. Safety sensors had been disabled with bypass wires. Control circuits had been modified to create delayed failures. "Jesus, boss," Marcus whispered, studying a sabotaged brake system. "If Damon operates this crane Monday morning, he won't," Terrell said grimly, "because we're going to have a safety stand down until every piece of equipment gets a full inspection." And Danny? Terrell looked across his construction site. His legitimate empire built on honest work and community trust. Someone was trying to steal it using the same predatory tactics he'd once employed in a different life. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Danny's going to learn what happens when you hunt a hunter," Terrell said. "But first I need to understand exactly who's paying for all this professional sabotage." As they packed up the evidence, Terrell felt the familiar surge of controlled anger that had once made him formidable on Detroit's streets. The difference was that this time, he was fighting to protect something good instead of destroying something else. The war for Johnson Construction had begun, and Danny Ricci had no idea he was facing an opponent who'd learned strategy in much harder schools than business college. The next morning brought a new revelation. Terrell arrived early to find Danny already in his office, making a phone call he clearly thought was private. "Equipment failures are accelerating the timeline," Danny was saying into his phone. 2 more incidents should be enough to trigger the insurance review. Once their rates spike, he'll have no choice but to sell. Terrell moved closer to the office window, using skills from his surveillance days to remain undetected while capturing audio on his phone's recording app. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," Danny continued. "The old criminal thinks his legitimate business makes him untouchable. He has no idea we've been planning this for months." The call ended, but Terrell had heard enough. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a corporate takeover disguised as an accident investigation. Someone wanted Johnson Construction badly enough to orchestrate systematic equipment failures that could have killed his workers. As Danny prepared to leave his office, Terrell faded back into the shadows, his mind already working on the next phase of his investigation. Tomorrow, he'd follow the money trail. Tonight, he'd make sure no more of his people got hurt. The hunter had become the hunted. But Danny Ricci was about to learn that some prey bit back. At 2:30 a.m., Terrell Johnson stood outside Danny Ricci's office using lockpicking skills he hadn't needed in 20 years. The techniques came back like muscle memory. Feel for the pins, apply gentle pressure, listen for the telltale click that meant another barrier had fallen. The office door opened with a whisper. Danny's workspace was meticulously organized, everything in its proper place like a shrine to corporate efficiency. But Terrell's trained eye immediately noticed what others would miss. A filing cabinet slightly askew, papers stacked too neatly, the subtle signs of someone who regularly hid important documents. He started with the computer, grateful that Danny's arrogance had led him to use a password that took Terrell 3 tries to crack. Efficiency 2024. The desktop revealed dozens of folders with innocuous names like Safety Protocols and Equipment Maintenance. The Equipment Maintenance folder contained what Terrell had hoped to find but dreaded to see. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet detailed projected accident scenarios complete with estimated insurance payouts and timeline projections. Each row represented a Johnson construction worker, their names reduced to cold calculations of disability costs and liability exposure. Jerome Jackson, $45,000 projected payout. Timeline, 2. 3 weeks recovery. Antoine Brown, $35,000 projected payout. Timeline, immediate return to work. Damon Carter, $125,000 projected payout. Timeline, permanent disability. The numbers told a horrifying story. Danny hadn't just been causing accidents. He'd been calculating their precise financial impact on Johnson Construction's insurance premiums and operational capacity. Terrell photographed every screen, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. In another folder labeled Insurance Analysis, he found projections showing exactly when Johnson Construction's insurance costs would become unsustainable. Month 8, 9, premium increases force operational scaling. Month 10, 11, company becomes acquisition target. Month 12, forced sale at 40 to 50% market value. A subfolder labeled Acquisition Partners contained correspondence that made Terrell's blood freeze. Danny, the timeline looks good. Castellano Construction is prepared to purchase Johnson assets once insurance liability forces Johnson into distressed sale. Your consulting fee remains at $500,000 as discussed. Ensure the next phase of equipment failures targets high-value workers for maximum insurance impact. Vincent Castellano. Vincent Castellano. Terrell knew that name from his street days. Old-school Italian contractor who'd been trying to break into Detroit's construction market for years. Castellano had the municipal connections but lacked the community trust that made Johnson Construction successful in predominantly black neighborhoods, so he'd decided to steal it. The filing cabinet yielded even more damning evidence. Hidden behind legitimate maintenance contracts, Terrell found Danny's real employment agreement, not with Johnson Construction, but with Castellano Industries. He'd been a corporate spy from day one, hired specifically to destroy Johnson Construction from within. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Boss, van just pulled up. 3 men heading toward the main building. Terrell quickly photographed the remaining documents, his movements efficient and silent. The cabinet also contained audio recording equipment, professional-grade surveillance gear that explained how Danny always seemed to know about private conversations between workers. In the final folder, Terrell found the smoking gun that transformed everything, detailed blueprints of Johnson Construction's building with notations marking structural vulnerabilities and controlled demolition points. This wasn't just about insurance fraud or corporate takeover. Danny and Castellano were planning to literally destroy his building, probably during a night shift when they could blame it on accumulated structural damage from unsafe practices. The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Terrell pocketed the most crucial documents and erased his digital footprints from Danny's computer. As footsteps approached the office door, he slipped out through the window he'd entered, an exit strategy that had served him well in his previous career. From his hiding spot in the equipment yard, Terrell watched Danny and 2 men in Hartwell industrial uniforms enter the building. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they controlled the situation completely. They were wrong. Terrell now had documented proof of conspiracy, insurance fraud, corporate espionage, and planned destruction of property. More importantly, he had evidence that Danny's next target was the night shift. 12 workers, including Marcus, who would be in the building when Castellano's structural failure was scheduled to occur. But evidence was only useful if he could present it to the right people at the right time. And with Danny's surveillance equipment, any conventional approach would be detected before Terrell could act. As he walked back to his car, Terrell felt the familiar cold calculation that had once made him formidable in much deadlier games. Danny and Castellano thought they were playing chess against a reformed criminal who'd gone soft. They were about to learn they'd been playing chess against a grandmaster who'd simply been using different pieces. The morning safety briefing started like every other, but Terrell had positioned himself differently. Instead of standing in the back like the reformed criminal Danny expected, he walked directly to the front of the assembled workers, carrying a banker's box filled with evidence. Danny was mid-sentence, explaining new efficiency protocols for the week, when he noticed Terrell approaching. His practiced smile faltered slightly. "Morning, T. Didn't expect you at the worker briefing today. Thought you had that municipal contract meeting." "Canceled it," Terrell said, setting the box on the table where everyone could see it. "Had something more important to handle." The 43 workers gathered in the equipment yard sensed something different. Conversations died. Marcus stepped closer, recognizing the controlled energy Terrell radiated when violence was about to unfold. "Danny, I've been doing some quality control inspections lately. Found some interesting things." Terrell's voice carried the quiet authority that had once commanded street corners and now commanded boardrooms. "Want to share with everyone what I discovered? T, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No!" The word cut through Danny's attempt at deflection like a blade. "These men have been risking their lives on sabotaged equipment. They deserve to hear this." Terrell reached into the box and pulled out the first piece of evidence. Photographs of the deliberately cut crane cable that nearly killed Antoine Brown. "Antoine, you said your cable just snapped under normal load, right?" Terrell held up the photo so everyone could see the clean cuts in the steel strands. "Turns out normal load doesn't create cuts this precise. Someone weakened this cable intentionally." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Workers leaned forward, studying the image. Antoine's face went pale as he realized how close he'd come to death. "T, this is highly inappropriate," Danny protested, his voice rising. "You can't just make accusations without proper investigation." "You're right about investigations." Terrell pulled out the spreadsheet printouts. "Like this investigation into projected insurance payouts for each worker's accident." He read from the document: Jerome Jackson, $45,000 projected payout. Antoine Brown, $35,000 projected payout. Damon Carter, $125,000 projected payout for permanent disability. The yard went dead silent. Damon Carter stepped forward, his massive frame tense with barely controlled fury. "You calculated how much money my accident would be worth?" "That's not what that document—" Danny started. "Shut up." The command came from Marcus, his voice carrying 20 years of street authority. "Let him finish." Terrell continued methodically, presenting each piece of evidence like a prosecutor building a case. The forged maintenance records, the correspondence with Castellano Construction, the audio recordings of private worker conversations. "Here's my favorite," Terrell said, holding up a blueprint marked with demolition points. "Structural analysis for controlled building collapse during night shift operations." The crowd's mood shifted from confused to dangerous. These weren't just employees anymore. They were a community that had been systematically hunted, and they were learning the identity of their predator. "Danny," Terrell said, his voice dropping to the whisper-quiet tone that preceded violence in his old life. "You want to tell these men why Castellano Construction is paying you $500,000 to destroy their workplace? This is insane!" Danny's composure finally cracked completely. "You think because you used to be some street thug, you can intimidate me with fake documents and conspiracy theories? I've got news for you, Terrell. People know what you are." The racial slur came next, delivered with the kind of venom that had been building for months. "You think running a legitimate business makes you respectable? You're still just another ignorant criminal who got lucky. These people follow you because they're too stupid to know better, but smart money knows you'll never be anything but a—" The word he used echoed across the construction yard like a gunshot. 43 workers stood frozen, watching their boss, a man who'd given them honest work and legitimate pride, absorb the kind of hatred that had plagued them their entire lives. Terrell didn't move, didn't flinch. When he spoke, his voice remained perfectly calm. "Danny, you made one mistake in all your planning." He stepped closer, and for the first time, Danny saw what Terrell had been hiding beneath 20 years of legitimate business practices. You assumed I was just another dumb criminal you could manipulate. But see, I spent 20 years learning to read people who wanted to kill me. 20 years studying how conspiracies work, how money flows, how predators hunt. Terrell smiled, and it was the coldest expression anyone had seen on his face since his street days. You're not smart, Danny. You're just racist enough to think you were the only one in this room with a brain. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Here's what's going to happen, Terrell continued. Those officers are going to arrest you for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. The FBI is going to investigate Castellano Construction for corporate racketeering, and you're going to spend a very long time in prison explaining to people exactly what kind of man deliberately tries to kill construction workers for money. Danny's face went pale as he realized the sirens were for him. The real difference between us, Danny, isn't that I used to be a criminal and you're legitimate. It's that I protected my community and you tried to destroy it. As the police cars entered the construction yard, Terrell turned to face his workers, his community, his family, his proof that men could change and build something better. Anyone who wants to keep working for a company that puts people before profit, be here tomorrow morning. Anyone who doesn't, I understand. Every single worker raised his hand. 3 weeks after Danny's arrest, Terrell stood before his assembled workforce with a clipboard in his hands, not the blood-stained symbol of betrayal from before, but a clean slate representing new beginnings. Gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd earned respect through protection rather than fear. We're going to rebuild this company the right way. Not the way I learned on the streets, not the way corporate America says we should, but the way working people deserve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction yard as 43 workers listened to their boss outline a transformation that would reshape Johnson Construction from the ground up. First change? Worker safety isn't management's responsibility anymore. It's everyone's responsibility with the power to make it happen. Terrell gestured to Jerome Jackson, who stood with his right arm still in a sling but his spine straight with renewed purpose. Jerome, you've been offered the position of head of safety and worker protection, not just inspecting equipment, but designing safety protocols, hiring safety personnel, and having veto power over any operation you consider dangerous. The workers erupted in spontaneous applause. Jerome had been with the company longer than anyone except Terrell himself, had survived the transition from street life to legitimate work, and had nearly died because someone else prioritized profit over his life. Boss, Jerome said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't have the college degrees for a management position. Jerome, you've got something more valuable than degrees. You've got the trust of every man in this yard, and you've got 20 years of keeping people alive in dangerous situations. Terrell's smile carried genuine warmth. The degrees we can get you, the integrity you already have. Marcus stepped forward. What about the rest of us? How do we know this isn't just feel-good talk that disappears when the next contract deadline hits? It was a fair question, and Terrell had prepared for it. Marcus, tell them about the new partnership structure. Marcus pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. Every worker with more than 5 years at Johnson Construction is being offered equity partnership. Not just profit sharing, but actual ownership stakes that grow with tenure and performance. The yard went silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just employment anymore. It was community ownership of their own economic destiny. Damon, Terrell called to the crane operator who'd barely escaped Danny's sabotage. You're being promoted to equipment maintenance supervisor. Your job is to work with Jerome's safety team to ensure every machine on this site operates exactly the way it's supposed to. Damon nodded, his massive frame straightening with newfound responsibility. What about outside contractors? No more outside contractors unless they're vetted by the safety team and approved by worker vote, Terrell replied. And every contractor gets the same equity sharing opportunity if they prove themselves trustworthy. Antoine Brown raised his hand. This sounds expensive. How are we going to afford all this worker ownership and safety equipment? Terrell's expression grew serious. Antoine, you want to know the truth? Danny's sabotage was supposed to cost us everything. Insurance investigations, lawsuit settlements, contract cancellations. Castellano projected we'd be bankrupt within the year. He pulled out financial statements that painted a stark picture. Instead, we're going to use the insurance settlements from Danny's documented fraud to fund the worker ownership program. The FBI's investigation of Castellano Construction is freeing up municipal contracts worth $12 million. And our safety record, once we fix Danny's sabotage damage, is going to make us the most reliable contractor in Detroit. "What about you, boss?" asked Kevin Washington. "You're giving up ownership to share it with us. What do you get out of this?" Terrell was quiet for a moment, looking across the faces of men who'd followed him from the streets into legitimate business, who'd trusted him with their livelihoods and their families' futures. "Kevin, 20 years ago, I had power because people were afraid of me. Today, I have power because people trust me to protect them." He gestured toward the construction site that had become a symbol of community transformation. This company was supposed to prove that men like us could change, could build something legitimate and lasting. Danny tried to destroy that by turning us against each other, making us compete instead of collaborate. The equity partnership ensures that never happens again, because everyone's success depends on everyone else's success. Jerome stepped forward, extending his left hand to Terrell. "Boss, I've got one condition for taking the safety position." "What's that?" "You keep the final word on major decisions, not because we can't handle responsibility, but because leadership ain't just about giving orders. It's about taking responsibility when things go wrong." Jerome's grip was firm despite his injured arm. "You took responsibility for Danny's sabotage even though you couldn't have known. That's the kind of leadership this community needs." The handshake between them symbolized something larger than employment or even partnership. It represented the transformation of predatory capitalism into community protection. "One more thing," Terrell announced. "We're establishing the Johnson Construction Training Academy. Any young person from our neighborhoods who wants to learn construction trades gets free training, guaranteed employment upon completion, and a path to equity partnership. And," he added with a smile that carried genuine pride, "Jerome's going to run the Academy's safety training program." Marcus looked around the yard at faces that had transformed from worried employees to empowered community members. "Boss, what do we tell people when they ask how a former street lieutenant learned to run a business like this?" Terrell considered the question carefully. "We tell them that the same skills that kept our community alive in dangerous times are the skills that keep our community thriving in legitimate times. The only difference is we're using those skills to build instead of destroy." As the workers dispersed to begin their newly empowered roles, Jerome lingered beside Terrell. "You know this is going to make us a target for other companies that don't want workers getting ideas about ownership and safety." "Jerome," Terrell replied, watching his community take ownership of their own destiny. "Let them come. We know how to protect what's ours." 6 months later, the Johnson Construction family barbecue filled the construction yard with sounds of genuine celebration. Children ran between picnic tables while their fathers, men who'd once feared coming to work, grilled burgers and shared stories of transformation. Jerome Jackson stood near the new safety training pavilion, his right arm moving freely after months of therapy. His 8-year-old daughter, Keisha, wore a miniature hard hat reading Future Safety Engineer as she listened to her father explain crane operations. "Daddy, is this where you got hurt?" she asked, pointing to the completely rebuilt concrete mixer. "Yes, baby girl, but that's also where your daddy learned that good people fight to protect each other." Jerome knelt to her level. "See Mr. Terrell over there? He made sure that machine could never hurt anyone again." "Is Mr. Terrell really a former bad guy?" Jerome smiled carefully. "Mr. Terrell used to make different choices, but now he chooses to keep families like ours safe and happy." Across the yard, Damon Carter demonstrated equipment safety to neighborhood teenagers from the training academy. His massive hands moved gently as he showed hydraulic system inspections. "Rule number 1, Damon explained. "Nobody touches equipment until Jerome's safety team approves. We don't care about delays or costs. We care that everyone goes home to their families." 16-year-old Marcus Williams Jr. raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, how do you trust equipment now after the sabotage?" "Son, I trust it because now I inspect it, Jerome inspects it, and 2 safety partners inspect it. When your safety affects my ownership stake and my stake affects your safety, we all look out for each other." Near the office, Antoine Brown taught basic electrical safety to workers' families, a program that emerged when workers realized their loved ones should understand workplace dangers. "Mrs. Washington," Antoine said to Kevin's wife, "this is proper electrical work. If you see exposed wires anywhere, call us immediately. Johnson Construction Partners take care of the whole community." Kevin Washington manned the community job board where neighbors posted repair requests. Every partner was encouraged to take side projects, keeping money circulating within their neighborhood. "Mr. Johnson," called Maria Santos, "our building's fire escape is falling apart. The landlord won't fix it." Terrell looked up from grilling burgers. "Write down the address, Maria. Jerome's team will inspect it this week. If it's dangerous, we'll fix it at cost." "What if the landlord can't pay?" "We'll fix it anyway. Safety doesn't wait for convenient financing." As afternoon wound down, Terrell sat surrounded by workers' children, answering questions about construction and why adults worked so much. "Mr. Terrell," asked Jerome's daughter, "my daddy says you used to be scary, but now you're nice. How did you change?" Terrell considered the question seriously. "Keisha, I learned that being strong means protecting people, not hurting them. The best way to be strong is to help others be strong too. Like how Daddy keeps everyone safe?" "Exactly. Your daddy is one of the strongest men I know because he protects his community." As families packed up, Jerome approached with the safety clipboard that had once been bloodstained. Now it held 6 months of 0 accident reports. "Boss, see this?" Jerome tapped the clean pages. "This is success, not profit margins or contracts. This." Terrell looked across the yard at families laughing together, children playing safely, and men transformed from worried employees to empowered community leaders. "Jerome, 20 years ago, I thought power meant making people afraid of disappointing me. Today I learned that real power means making people proud to stand with me. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we will keep building, not just buildings, community." The barbecue ended with workers' children presenting handmade thank you cards to the safety team. Jerome's daughter handed Terrell a drawing of the construction site with everyone smiling under a rainbow. "This is our safe place," she explained, "where good people work together." Terrell studied the crayon artwork, stick figures and hard hats building something together, all different colors but all smiling. It captured something corporate mission statements never could: the transformation of a workplace from a site of exploitation into a foundation of community strength. "Keisha, this is the most beautiful blueprint I've ever seen," he said, carefully folding the drawing. "Mind if I keep it in my office?" "You have to promise to build it exactly like my picture." "I promise. We're going to keep building exactly like your picture, with everyone safe and smiling." As the last families departed, the construction yard settled into a peaceful evening quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new contracts, new opportunities to prove that legitimate success could lift entire communities. But tonight, Terrell Johnson, former street lieutenant turned community protector, felt something he'd never experienced in his criminal days: the deep satisfaction of building something that would outlast him. 2 years later, Johnson Construction had become more than a company. It had become a model. Jerome Jackson's new office at the Johnson Construction Training Academy displayed the original blood-stained safety clipboard, now framed with a plaque: "Never again. Community protects community." As head of safety and community development, Jerome oversaw programs that had trained 200 young people from Detroit neighborhoods, with 95% job placement and 0 workplace injuries. "Mr. Jackson," called 10-year-old Keisha, spending summer break at the academy, "the students want to hear the story again." Jerome walked toward 15 teenagers learning construction trades. "That story isn't about Mr. Terrell saving us," he told them. "It's about what happens when a community protects itself." Through the window, Terrell reviewed blueprints with Marcus, now vice president. Both wore hard hats with the quiet authority of leaders who'd earned respect through protection. Jerome's phone buzzed with Terrell's text. "City Council approved community center contract. Building something permanent." Jerome replied, "Already built something permanent. Everything else is just construction." The Johnson model had spread beyond Detroit. Worker-owned construction cooperatives were forming in Cleveland, Milwaukee, and Chicago, all emphasizing community protection through economic empowerment. Danny Ricci served 8 years for conspiracy and fraud. Castellano Construction was dissolved, assets sold for restitution. But real victory wasn't in courtrooms or financial statements. It was every worker going home safe daily, knowing they were part of something valuing their lives over profit margins. The Detroit Business Journal had featured Terrell on its cover. From streets to boardroom, how worker ownership transformed construction. But the headline that mattered most was simpler. 0 accidents, 24 months running. Every Johnson construction partner understood the lesson Terrell had learned through blood and betrayal. Legitimate power meant lifting your community, not exploiting it. In his office, Terrell kept Keisha's crayon drawing of the construction site. Stick figures in hard hats, building together, all different colors but all smiling. It remained the most accurate blueprint he'd ever seen. The transformation was complete. The community was protected. The work continued. Have you ever felt unsafe at work because of who you are? Your story matters. Share it in the comments. Someone needs to hear they're not alone.